Many attempts to predict the long-term behavior of rival nations fail because they rely on the most visible data streams. We capture massive amounts of information, yet the internal logic of the system often remains opaque. Analysts frequently concentrate their monitoring on output nodes, specific coastal hubs designed to interface with foreign systems. This metropolitan layer is engineered for external legibility and commercial interaction. It provides a standardized space for global finance to operate. Historically, this architecture mirrors the 19th century treaty port dynamic, a structural choice made to facilitate trade while compartmentalizing foreign influence from the rest of the country. Because these nodes are pre-processed for external interaction, they offer data on the civilization's current capacity, but reveal very little about the deep-seated survival attractors that drive its decision-making. Understanding a complex adaptive system requires looking past this interface to identify the original path dependencies, the early institutional choices that established the system's long-run trajectory. In the Chinese system, that origin point is the Shandong region, where the civilization's core operating logic was forged during the intense competition of the Warring States period. These stone ruins are the Great Wall of Qi. They represent an early attempt to institutionalize a defensive perimeter during a time when 7 major states were locked in a 200-year struggle for survival. The survival strategies developed during this era were encoded into what researchers call state memory, a library of institutional responses that the civilization returns to whenever it faces existential stress. Mapping these ancient origin nodes provides a clearer view of the system's internal logic than monitoring modern economic outputs alone. Physical geography sets the metabolic cost of maintaining a civilization. Border defense and logistical coordination have a fixed price in energy and resources. The CAMS framework measures this through the energy gradient, total capacity minus cumulative stress load. Maritime systems externalize stress through decentralized trade networks, maintaining positive gradients. But overland empires face massive land borders and internal logistical friction, generating high stress that forces the gradient negative. Historical data from the CAMS Civilizations panel illustrates this lock-in effect across multiple eras. Here, maritime nodes like Singapore maintain a strong surplus. In contrast, land-based dynasties like the Liao, Yuan, and Jin show negative gradients, reflecting the heavy metabolic burden of continental geography. Geography establishes the baseline parameters for a macro system, often steering it towards specific attractor basins, from which it is difficult to escape. Continental geography has forced successive Chinese dynasties into a recurring trajectory that has played out multiple times over the last 2 millennia. This declining arc tracks riverine empires. First, violent consolidation. Capacity spikes rapidly as the state unifies. Next, the freeze phase. Mounting bureaucratic and defense costs drive the energy gradient negative. The system grows rigid. Finally, an external shock triggers a terminal fracture, shattering the state. If these collapses are a predictable outcome of continental geography, we have to ask how the underlying civilization manages to regenerate. Survival depends on nested path dependence, a set of interlocking institutional safety nets that endure even when the central regime fails. Dynastic collapse is a recurring event, but the continuity of the civilization is maintained through its institutional memory. The system's durability rests on macro lock-ins, formal state institutions designed to manage and control talent over very long time horizons. This logic began at the Jixia Academy in 318 BCE, evolving into the Imperial Examination System, or Keiju, linking social mobility to state service. Today, that identical operational logic persists in the Gaokao University exams, where merit remains the primary pathway to elite status. This institutional mandate regenerates with each new generation, emphasizing performance as the legitimate basis for authority. These state structures are supported by micro-lock-ins, informal family norms that prepare the population to operate within this hierarchy. Filial piety, or shao, acts as the primary node for this encoding. It prioritizes intergenerational duty and respect for hierarchy within the home long before the state ever gets involved. While 20th century revolutions explicitly attacked these Confucian values, they proved remarkably resilient. They re-emerged across mainland, diaspora, and regional societies as the dominant framework for family life once the acute stress of the revolution receded. When macro-state institutions and micro-family values align, they create an attractor basin deep enough to survive major political transformations. Acute stress events test the durability of these systems. The century of humiliation was the most severe shock in modern history. During this period, foreign powers imposed their own legal and commercial interfaces on the country through military force. The resulting damage was extensive. The imperial government collapsed, republican efforts failed, and decades of internal violence followed. In path dependence theory, a system facing such pressure doesn't necessarily invent a new path. It often performs an emergency rollback. The civilization survived this period by retreating to its most reliable state memory attractors, meritocratic examinations, and centralized, ritualized legitimation. This legitimation architecture is physically encoded at sites like Mount Tai, where rulers for over 2,000 years have performed rites to validate their mandate. The rapid growth seen in recent decades reflects a system realigning with its historical baseline after the extreme perturbations of the previous century. We must distinguish between institutional transformation, building something new, and institutional translation, which involves updating the user interface of a very old system. Modern expressions of civilizational identity, such as the Hanfu revival seen among graduates, are an active re-encoding of coherent strategies during periods of external pressure. The ancient habit of identifying and absorbing scholars into the state structure is visible in modern talent recruitment strategies and political elite selection. When political leaders host elaborate banquets to honor intellectual achievement, they are operating within a behavioral loop that stretches back to the Jixia Academy. Mistaking these interface updates for a fundamental change in the system's source code can lead to significant miscalculations by competing powers. These principles of civilizational metabolism are not limited to one region. They govern the survival and decline of all macro societies. This CAMS dashboard tracks the systemic health and stress load of the United States. The regime classification chart reveals a shift from long, stable adaptation into sustained systemic strain, and quantitative indicators show mean system stress breaking past critical crisis thresholds in the 2020s. As the system faces this mounting pressure, it is likely to return to its own established historical path dependencies rather than seeking purely novel solutions. Understanding the future of any empire requires quantifying its energy gradient and tracing its path dependencies back to their original nodes. Over the long run, the roots of a system explain the behavior of the leaves.